and interviewed 17 different pastors, and this is a little bit of my study there. 근데 I think what Dr. Michael shared just a little bit, Pastor Michael shared just a little bit about moving from dependent to interdependent to dependent. For the sake of just in my terms, the way that I understood it, and he has much more expertise in this field than I do, but interdependent, to my understanding, was where they shared the same campus. So EM and KM, two completely different pastors, two completely different sessions, but same resources, like he said, same projects, same, campus, space. And then dependent would be these now EM churches that are, or I guess, multi-ethnic churches that are now emerging, that we see there's a lot of them even popping up here in Los Angeles. And now I believe a lot of second-generation pastors want to become interdependent or dependent, as Pastor Michael shared. And we want to move toward interdependence, and we have a vision to move toward interdependence, but it's really difficult to move toward interdependence if the first-generation pastor does not have that same heart or that same vision. Now, having said that, I love my senior pastor. He's my father. Actually, Shin Moksa님 is my father. I was married 6 years ago, so my different last name. But I love my father. I respect my father so much. And I was sharing with somebody over lunch, my father thinks he has a very, very open mentality for first generation. He's not here, so I shouldn't be speaking about him. But, he thinks he's very open-minded, which he is. But I believe first generations thinking of open-mindedness even, and second generations, it's different because we're completely two separate cultures. I believe we have expectations that we should think alike and we should act alike, we should behave alike, because we look the same on the outside. After all, we like kimchi jjigae together, and we like, to celebrate Tor. Tor's a big thing. I have an 8-month-old son, and we're trying to save money to do a Tor now, but we're actually completely different, East and West. And so second generation wants to move toward interdependence, but it's very, very difficult. And so ultimately what I think is second generation, based on the study, they end up leaving. They desire interdependence or dependence, but they end up leaving and starting altogether new churches. And so we see a lot of these churches now coming up and being birthed here in Southern California. What I found is the reason why, there are many factors, sure. Of course, number one, if the Lord calls, and if God calls us to church plant, then we need to go. There's no if, and, or buts about that. But apart from that, separate from that, I found that the reason why a lot of second generation pastors are leaving is because of power struggle. And what I mean by power struggle, and I know Dr. Hertig was here just a little while ago, and she wrote a lot on power struggle, but it's happened in our church as well, where the KM pastor, Ilse Moksa님, will say, come to the EM pastor, to a second generation pastor, come work with me. And so then the second generation pastor is thinking, okay, we're going to work side by side like this. We're going to be partners like this. So we will discuss together, we will meet together, we will have lunch together, coffee together, or whatever. But the first generation pastor's thinking of working together is this, you see, where the first generation pastor makes the decisions and the second generation pastor just obeys. And so for first generation pastors, they might be little details, but to second generation, it's a huge difference. How come you didn't consult me? Why didn't you ask me? And then first generation says, you're so 교만해. Why would I discuss with you? This is my decision. And not saying that either is wrong, or it's just different. I think the way that we think is different. And so, for instance, first generation pastor will decide, okay, our church, we need to move location. Second generation pastor wants to discuss together, where's the EM location going to be, or where are we going to move? But the first generation pastor just goes ahead and makes the decision, announces it to the rest of the KM pastor meeting on Tuesday morning, or whenever you have your Tuesday meeting or your pastor meeting, and it comes a shock to the second generation pastor. So ultimately, at the end of the day, the reason why I call it power struggle is because second generation wants to be treated with equal regard to the first generation pastor. But that's difficult. I believe in a hierarchical, in a first generation Eastern mentality. On top of that, I believe second generation EM pastors, we feel like we're treated as kids. I don't think he meant this, but even in our dialogue when 오 목사님 before said EM 학생들이 오실 텐데, but everyone here is 30, 40, 50 years old. I'm not saying 오 목사, I know it's okay. It's okay. No, it's okay. But I'm just saying, I think even in our language, we always say EM 애들. And EM, we always refer to KM adults. We always say 부모님들, but we're, I'm in my 30s, everyone here is 40, 50 years old, we have our careers, we have children, our children are starting to have children, but just because we speak English, we're treated as children. And not only that, but EM is categorized as education department, even if structurally in the church, this like bag is just coming out, it's like a venting session. Sorry, Dad. So it's, if, even though structurally EM is, senior pastor is here and EM is here and education department is separate, because we use the same building as education department, or if there's Christmas presentation, EM, why don't you perform something during Christmas presentation or something like this? Just little things like that makes EM pastors and the congregation members feel like children, and hence there's no ownership. If you ask EM members, why are you leaving the church? Or, they'll say, I want to find my own church. This isn't my church, this is my parents' church. And because they were raised in this church and they think that this is their parents' church, they want to find their own identity, they leave. Of course, granted, there are some exceptions, and I believe Yongnak is one of those churches that we really strive to be like. And like Pastor Sam said here earlier, even when we invite second-generation pastors to symposiums or services, we have joint services. But joint services in the fact that everything is in Korean, 찬양's in Korean, prayer is in Korean, only the sermon is translated into English. So it's not really a combined service then, is it? That I'm just speaking from a second-generation perspective. Now, having said that, I know I'm going much longer than 5 minutes, and I apologize for that. But I'm not saying that it's just a first generation problem or fault. Second generation, I absolutely agree, we're at fault too. We've been pointing fingers and, we're not receiving enough treatment. We haven't, what have you done for us? You're not treating us right. Where I understand that EM pastors, in our pride and arrogance, we expect just first generations to speak English and to just to understand and accept me, whereas we haven't done the same. So I understand that, and I apologize on behalf. In conclusion, though, I want to say, Dr. Hertig's study, and even Pastor Michael said 20 years ago, he thought, okay, this model isn't going to work. But now 20 years later in 2012, we are asking the same questions. How can we keep the second generation, or now the third generation, from leaving? Whereas I think they've already left. If not, they're already in transition and they're already leaving. So I wonder if the question should not then be, what can we do now that they have left? Or what can we do to bless them? Or I don't know what the question should be, but we see them leaving. So what should we do from here? And I want to just leave with that question. Thank you so much. I'm sorry. I spoke
You are right on target. Thank you so much for your candid, sincere sharing to this kind of forum setting. I thank you so much once again. 여러분 다 이해하셨을 거라고 생각을 하는데요. 2세들의 생각 속에 우리 닥터홍이 시어한 것처럼 2세들은 1세들과 함께 하기를 원한다는 겁니다. 싫어하는 게 아니고 원하는데, 원함은 있는데 실질적으로는 너무나도 많은 갈등들이 있다는 것이죠. 그래서 1세 목회자가 너 나하고 같이 일하자, 우리 같이 일하면 좋겠다고 생각을 하면 2세 목회자가 생각할 때는 같이 이렇게 상의할 걸로 생각하는데 1세 목회자는 내가 하는 대로 시킨 대로 해라, 이런 생각들이 있기 때문에 떠나는 경우들이 많다는 거죠. 그래서 닥터홍이 왜 2세들이 한국 교회를 떠나는가에 대한 논문을 발표하면서 연구를 했던 결과들을 자기의 경험을 비춰서 설명을 하곤 했었는데요. 그리고 또 한 가지는 아직 여전히 2세들은 1세 교회 가면 어린아이 취급받는다. 이거는 부모님의 교회고 우리 교회라고 하는 오너십을 갖기가 굉장히 어렵다. 이런 중요한 포인트들을 몇 가지 이야기를 했는데 나중에 우리 질문하면 좋은 시간 가질 것 같습니다. 우리 마지막 분 말씀해 주시죠.
저는 강우중 전도사라고 합니다. 여기 계신 다른 분들하고 틀리게 저는 아직 박사학위도 없고 안수도 못 받았습니다. 그래서 좀 많이 부족하더라도 많이 이해해 주시고요. As a pastor, more accurate 전도사 from Korean ministry, I hope to suggest alternative ways for alleviate current otherness or foreignness within Korean church, 교회, and hopefully explore ways to build better dialogical relationship as well. My experience as an overseas student and 전도사 has given me a unique perspective on the Korean immigrant church. The Korean church has tried to be socially relevant and to show hospitality and respect to the marginalized and ethnic others. In this context, the Korean church has faithfully responded to the question, what is the relation between the socio-culturally and ethno-racially marginalized and Christian church? Yet to do so, the Korean church focuses not only on social circumstance, but also on inward spiritual transformation. In fact, I think the Korean church has realized qualitatively new awareness of the dynamics of relation, both spiritually and socially. However, in addressing that, the Korean church also needs embrace and reconcile the internal differences in socio-economic status, generation, culture, and particularly English among members. In fact, the Korean immigrant church is asked to answer the question from internal context. What is the relation between KM and EM, and parental generation and next generation? In particular, how do we understand each other? And what do we do to understand each other? In responding to these questions, the Korean church begins to explore how it can best react to the other members and society at large. Through corporate ministry, I mean here such as joint summer retreat, joint worship services, and particularly services for other ethnic immigrants, both KM and EM, and also parental generation and next generation can go beyond existing inner foreignness or otherness. In doing so, the Korean church can demonstrate practically and spiritually how to achieve an interaction with the members as a new family. We immigrants and American-born Koreans experience Han, in which, quote, frustrated hope, the collapsed feeling of pain, resentful bitterness, and the wounded heart in relation to dominant society because of heterogeneity in race, ethnicity, and language. However, we also realize that Han can be founded as a way of indifference, foreignness, and prejudice among members within 교회. For example, through my experience, I realized that as KM college student, usually 유학생, and EM college student encounter one another, they inevitably encounter mutual difference, foreignness, or prejudice. Now I will share two stories. One is the experience of KM student and the other from EM. One day, after cleaning church building, I had a conversation with a Korean overseas student. During the conversation, he complained to me that whenever church needs to work together, such as cleaning, moving, serving lunch, we KM college students are supposed to participate, to help. We are taking for granted, but EM college students are not. They will not come, and the parental generation didn't ask to call them. So we call them not EM, English ministry, but we call them IM, Imperial ministry. In addition, with a conversation with a female EM college student, I also had a chance to hear about how EM members understand KM members. She told me that we American-born Korean, or Gyopo, as they called us, to work, we needed to work to pay rent, utilities, and even tuition. But KM college students are rich. They have great funding source, parent. KM easily buy an expensive luxury car. And even KM asked us help their papers. But it was more than proof-reading. So having a relationship with them automatically means I will be their writing tutor. But I don't waste my time. But I can help them. And anyway, actually, I don't want to be abused. All I can convey about my experience in that church is an overwhelming sensation of prejudice and indifference and foreignness. Of course, I do not believe my experience is universal among the Korean church, since I know many people encourage each other with a welcoming heart, warm heart. However, as Christians, we cannot ignore isolation, prejudice, and indifference, even in a small part, particularly within 교회. To achieve a dialogical relationship, each group, KM and EM, and the parental generation and next generation, must, to some extent, reshape their attitude and accept difference. Thus, it becomes incumbent upon the groups to respect the practices and culture of the others in order to foster mutual harmony within 교회. I believe that ministry with other members and for ethnic others would be the alternative ways to reshape and rebuild the ministry beyond current tension within 교회. By demonstrating practically how to achieve equal interaction between I and you and us and them, reciprocity of ministry works both internally and externally, spiritually and socially, against foreignness and otherness. I believe this is the key responsibility, and this is our privilege of ministry. Thank you.
네, 전도사님도 한국말로 1분만 잠깐만
예.
해주시면 좋겠습니다.
한국에 계신 한국 분들이나 여기 이민 와 계신 모든 분들이 공통적으로 나의 삶을 표현하자 그러면 한이라는 단어, 미국에 와서 영어가 안 돼서 내 가슴에 한이 쌓이고 색깔이 틀려서 한이 쌓이고 그 외부적인 관계에서 내 마음속에 쌓이는 한들, 그 사전적인 의미로 정확히 표현할 수 없지만 내 마음속에 나만 알 수 있는 이런 응어리지는 그런 아픔들을 가지고 우리는 살아간다고 볼 수가 있는데요. 그 외부에서 느껴지는, 외부로부터 받을 수밖에 없는 그 한의 감정을 나만 받는 것이 아니고 내가 내 주위에 있는 사람, 특별히 내 교회 안에 있는 사람, 언어가 틀리고 사회적, 경제적 신분이 틀리다는 사람에 대한 무관심과 소외를 통해서 그 사람들에게 나 역시 한을 경험하게 할 수 있다는 것, 그런 것들에 대한 경각심을 우리가 함께 깨우쳐야 할 것이고요. 그리고 이민교회 특별히 이 주류 사회와의 관계의 개선을 위해서 노력하는 것처럼 교회 내부에 존재하고 있는 그 KM, 부모님 세대, 자녀 세대 간에 존재하는 그런 괴리감들을 먼저 극복하는 것이 우리 이민교회가 먼저 추구해야 될 방향이 아닌가에 대해서 말씀드렸습니다.
우리 크게 한번 박수 우리 모든 분들에게 한번 하면 좋겠습니다. I have 15 minutes right now. There's so much that we want to talk about, and I want to give some time to the floor to ask some questions. But before I do that, is any one of you have any questions to any of the presenters? 우리 먼저 여기 있는 분들에게 서로 질문하면 좋겠는데요. Any questions that you may have? Yes.
Yeah, actually, I have a question to Dr. Hong. As you shared your experience between KM, EN, you said that there is kind of existing stratified controllership, KM and EM. The senior pastor for KM and a junior pastor from the EM. I think it's not just the issues about stratified the structure in Korean church. But that is, I think, the very example of a foreignness, otherness between KM and EM. So hopefully, I suggest in understanding that kind of stereotype of the structure between K and EM, I hope understand it as a kind of foreignness existing between I and U. I mean the KM and EM. Yeah, not just the politically stratified structures, but it's just the very example of the foreignness, otherness between I and U. Yeah.
Would you respond to that? I don't know whether there was a question or a comment, but would you respond?
Telling me
yeah.
to have broader thinking. Thank you. No, no, I agree that it is a foreign otherness. But as I said earlier, I think there's also expectations because yes, we are different, but we expect each other to be more similar, I think. And so, like I said, because we like the same foods, because we can understand Korean and speak a little bit of it, because we like, the Korean game shows and we like the K-pop singer, I don't know any of them, but because we like this culture, I think there's an expectation for us to think and operate like first generation as well. Though we have those similarities, however, because our study is here and because our upbringing is here, we're very, very different. The reason also because, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it's like this. 선교지 나갈 때, when we go to China or when we go to Ukraine or to somewhere in Africa, we study that culture and we learn the language and we learn what they like and what they don't like, and we're very, very careful to not offend that culture. And I think we need to have the same mentality and approach to first and second generations. As a second generation, yes, they're my parents, but it's a different culture, and so I need to study and respect and make sure that I know the culture and I don't offend the culture. But because I think that level of expectation and commonality is there, we don't do that, and we disregard each other's culture and we become rude toward each other. But I thank you for enlightening me. Thank you.
Any others? 네. 먼저 물어봤던 질문에 대해서 코멘트를 하나 하고요.
홍 박사님께서 말씀하셨던 흔히들 얘기하는 한인교회의 그런 독재자적, 지배자적 구조에 대해서 그렇게 구조로만 계층화된 구조로만 볼 것이 아니라 그것이야말로 정말 KM과 EM 사이에 존재하는 그 문화적 차이로 접근해야 될 것이 아닌가라는 생각이 들거든요. 그래서 이렇게 지배 구조, 피지배 구조 이런 험악한 구조로 볼 것이 아니고 문화적 차이에서 오는, 그래서 우리가 이게 이해해야 할 차원에서 이 문제를 접근하면 더 좋지 않을까라고 제가 이렇게 말씀을 드렸었습니다. 예.
Anyone has questions? Yes.
Yeah, I have a comment. We always talks about the relationship between the KM and EM and power struggles between the senior pastor and many cases KM ministers and EM ministers. But as we understand, there is that kind of power struggles always from the beginning of the church. Look at Paul's gospel, Paul's letters. He always talks about the power struggles. There's somebody who wanted to attack him, who wanted to stand against him. There was a struggles between the Jerusalem church and the new churches in the Mediterranean basins. They are, so to speak, second or third generation who speaks different language, who had a different culture. There was, cultural conflict and language difference. From the beginning of the church history, that kind of struggles was there. It's not very unique to Korean American society. So that's why, I wanted to point it out. We need to go back to the church. We are thinking about and we are studying about the, phenomenon. We are very much depend on the sociologist. I realized that so many, studies about immigrant churches has been done by sociologists, not the pastors or theologian. That's what I found out. I think that's quite important, and that's something that we are missing right now. We need to go back to the Bible, and we need to understand the background and the full scales of power dynamics and the conflicts existed among the early churches. Then we can find